A millionaire left me everything. His wife's journal showed the truth. He spent fortunes on his mistress during her chemo. I forgive you, but you should have been here, she wrote. His family has no idea what I'll do with his money. I never thought I'd be standing in a lawyer's office watching a room full of strangers fight over a dead man's money. But there I was, dirt still under my fingernails from digging graves all morning, while men in expensive suits glared at me like I'd stolen something. The old man's relatives had come expecting gold, but all they got was my name on a piece of paper and the fury that comes with shattered greed. Why would a millionaire leave everything to a gravedigger he barely knew? And what could possibly make a dying man choose a stranger over his own blood? The answer is simple yet haunting. Guilt weighs more than gold, and some promises are worth more than inheritance. Because 3 months before Richard Ashford took his last breath, he offered me a fortune to bury a secret, one that would destroy his family's memory of him forever. It started on a cold October morning when I saw him standing alone at the edge of the cemetery, staring at a fresh grave. He didn't look like the other mourners who came and went. There was something desperate in the way he gripped his cane, like he was holding on to his last thread of sanity. I approached him out of courtesy, asking if he needed help finding someone. He turned to me with eyes so hollow they seemed to echo, and said something I'll never forget. I need you to help me lie down beside the woman I destroyed my life for. That's when he told me about Claire, his ex-lover, the woman buried 6 feet under the spot where he stood. He told me about the penthouse he'd bought her, the quarterly payments that never stopped, the trips to Paris and Rome while his wife lay dying in a hospital bed 12 miles away. He spoke without shame at first, as if confessing to a priest who couldn't judge him. But then his voice cracked and I saw the truth bleeding through his words. He knew exactly what he'd done, and it was eating him alive from the inside out. Richard invited me to his mansion the following week. I expected something grand, but nothing prepared me for the sheer excess of it. Marble floors that stretched like frozen lakes, chandeliers that cost more than my entire house, rooms that hadn't been opened in years. He led me through the halls with his cane tapping against the stone, each step deliberate and heavy. We ended up in his study, a dark room lined with leather books nobody had read and paintings nobody looked at anymore. He poured himself a whiskey and didn't offer me one. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of bank statements, receipts, and photographs. He spread them across his mahogany desk like evidence at a crime scene. I want you to understand what I'm asking you to do, he said, pushing the papers toward me. I want you to see who I really was. The numbers made my head spin. Monthly transfers of $15,000. Bills from luxury hotels in Monaco and Santorini. Receipts for jewelry that cost more than most people earn in a year. And photographs. Claire draped in silk on a balcony overlooking the Mediterranean. Claire laughing in a restaurant I couldn't pronounce. Claire wearing diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. Every image was dated, and every date told the same cruel story. While his wife Margaret suffered, he was somewhere else, spending their fortune on a woman who'd left him decades ago, but never really let him go. I met Claire when I was 25, Richard said, staring at one of the photographs. Before Margaret, before the money. She was wild and impossible, the kind of woman who made you feel alive just by standing in the same room. But she didn't want marriage or stability. She wanted freedom, adventure, the world on her terms. So she left me. He picked up another photo, this one of Margaret, a kind-faced woman with gentle eyes and a smile that seemed to apologize for taking up space. Margaret was everything Claire wasn't. Patient, loyal. She loved me in a way that felt safe, predictable. So I married her, built this empire, gave her the life everyone said she deserved. But Claire, his voice faltered. Claire came back 15 years later, not for me, for the life I could give her. That's when the arrangement began. Claire didn't want him back as a husband or a lover. She wanted a sponsor, a silent partner in her endless pursuit of pleasure. And Richard, trapped in a marriage that felt like wearing someone else's clothes, said yes. He created a separate account his wife never knew about. He scheduled his business trips around Claire's whims. He built her an entire existence funded by the fortune he and Margaret had built together. Margaret got sick 8 years into my arrangement with Claire, he continued. his hands shaking as he refilled his glass. Cancer. It started small, manageable. The doctor said she had time. But time isn't free. It costs attention, presence, sacrifice, and I gave mine to Claire instead. He showed me the contrast in stark detail. Hospital bills for Margaret's treatments, always paid, never questioned, but never accompanied by his presence. Meanwhile, receipts showed him in Venice the week Margaret started chemotherapy, in Barcelona when she lost her hair, in the French Riviera when she stopped being able to walk without help. I hired the best nurses money could buy, Richard said, as if that justified anything. Margaret had round-the-clock care, every comfort, every treatment available. But I wasn't there. I was with Claire, pretending I was still 25 and the world owed me happiness. Margaret died on a Tuesday morning in April. Richard found out via a phone call from her nurse while he was having breakfast with Claire at a cafe in Nice. He flew back for the funeral, played the grieving widower, accepted condolences from people who had no idea where he'd really been. 3 months later, Claire died suddenly. A heart attack at 59, quick and unexpected. That's when everything caught up to me, Richard whispered. I'd sacrificed the woman who loved me for the woman who only loved what I could give her. And now they're both gone, and I'm here alone with all this money that bought me nothing but regret. Richard stood up from his desk and walked to a bookshelf in the corner of his study. He pulled out a leather-bound journal, its edges worn and pages yellowed with time. I found this after Margaret died, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was in her nightstand, underneath her Bible and reading glasses. I almost threw it away with the rest of her things, but something made me open it. He placed the journal in my hands. The weight of it felt wrong, like I was holding something I had no right to touch. Read it, he insisted. You need to know what kind of man leaves his fortune to a grave digger. I opened to a random page, dated 6 years before Margaret's death. Her handwriting was neat and careful, the kind that comes from someone who was taught that presentation matters. Richard came home late again tonight. The entry began. He said the board meeting ran long, but his shirt smelled like perfume I don't wear. Chanel No. 5. I remember because it's what I wanted him to buy me for our anniversary, but he said it was too expensive. I wonder what she looks like, this woman who wears fragrances I can't afford with my own husband's money. My stomach turned as I flipped through more pages. Entry after entry, year after year, Margaret had documented every lie, every absence, every trace of evidence that Richard thought he'd hidden. She'd found hotel receipts in his jacket pockets. She'd noticed the separate credit card statements that came to his office instead of their home. She'd even hired a private investigator once, but stopped him before he could deliver the full report because she said she didn't want to see the photographs. She knew everything, Richard said, slumping back into his chair. From the beginning, and she never said a word. One entry, written 3 months after her cancer diagnosis, tore through me like a blade. The doctor said I have 2 years, maybe 3 if the treatment works. Richard wasn't there to hear it. He texted saying he was stuck in New York, but I saw his location on the phone app we share. He's in Rome. I suppose I should be angry, but I'm mostly tired. Tired of pretending I don't know. Tired of hoping he'll choose me. I think about confronting him sometimes, making him admit what he's doing. But what would that accomplish? He'd either lie to my face or tell me the truth, and I'm not sure which would hurt more. At least in the silence I can pretend there's still a marriage to save. Richard's nurse, a woman named Elena who'd cared for Margaret during her final months, had written a letter that was tucked between the journal's last pages. Richard pulled it out and read it aloud to me. Mrs. Ashford asked me to give this to you after she passed, but I couldn't bring myself to do it while you were grieving. She made me promise not to deliver it until at least a year after her death. She said you'd need time before you could understand what she wanted to say. The letter was brief, but devastating. Margaret wrote that she'd known about Claire since the first wire transfer. She'd accessed Richard's accounts years ago when she was managing their household finances. She could have divorced him, exposed him, taken half of everything. But she didn't. I stayed because I loved you, she wrote. Not the version of you that existed when we met, but the broken man you became. I thought if I loved you enough, consistently enough, quietly enough, you'd eventually see what was right in front of you. I thought you'd come back to me. The final paragraph made Richard's face crumble. I'm writing this from my hospital bed. You're in Spain right now. I saw the charge come through this morning. The nurses think you're at a medical conference. I let them believe it because I can't bear for anyone to know the truth. I want you to know that I forgive you, Richard. But more importantly, I want you to know that you should have been here. Not for my sake, but for yours. Because one day you'll realize what you gave up, and by then it will be too late to make it right. I hope you find peace, but I don't think you will. Not beside me anyway. I deserved better than what you gave me, but I loved you too much to demand it. Richard closed the journal and set it aside like it burned his hands. The silence in that study felt suffocating, thick with decades of regret that no amount of money could ventilate. He looked at me with those hollow eyes again, and I understood why he'd brought me here. He wasn't looking for absolution. He was looking for someone willing to condemn him properly. I can't be buried beside Margaret, he said flatly. I don't deserve to spend eternity next to a woman whose entire life I wasted. She gave me everything and I gave her scraps. The thought of my name on a headstone next to hers makes me physically ill. I shifted in my chair, uncomfortable with where this conversation was heading. Mr. Ashford, I'm just a grave digger. I move earth and lower caskets. What you're talking about sounds like something you need to discuss with a priest or a therapist. I've tried both, he said. The priest told me to pray for forgiveness. The therapist told me to forgive myself. Neither of them understood that some things can't be forgiven and shouldn't be. I don't want peace. I want the punishment I deserve. He pulled out another document, a cemetery plot map with 3 marked locations. Margaret's grave was in the family section, a premium spot beneath an old oak tree. Claire's grave was on the opposite side of the cemetery, in a newer section with manicured hedges and marble benches. The distance between them was intentional, a final separation even in death. I bought the plot next to Claire 6 weeks after she died, Richard explained. Before anyone knew I was sick. Before I'd even been diagnosed with the cancer that's killing me now. I knew exactly where I belonged, and it wasn't with my wife. I stood up, ready to leave. Mr. Ashford, I can't help you with this. What you're asking, it's not right. Your family will never understand. Margaret's memory deserves better. Margaret's memory deserves the truth, he shot back. And the truth is that I never loved her the way she loved me. I was comfortable with her. Safe. But Claire owned parts of me that Margaret never even knew existed. I'm not proud of it. I'm not justifying it. But I won't lie about it anymore. Especially not in death. He opened his checkbook and wrote out a figure that made my hands go numb. More money than I'd see in 10 lifetimes of digging graves. This is yours if you make sure I'm buried next to Claire, not Margaret. I've already updated my will. Everything, the house, the investments, the accounts, goes to you. All you have to do is fulfill one request. Put me in the ground beside the woman I destroyed my life for. I stared at the check, then at him. Why me? You could hire a funeral director. You could arrange this yourself through proper channels. Because funeral directors answer to families, Richard said. And my family will fight this. My brother, my cousins, Margaret's sister, they'll all demand I be buried in the family plot next to my wife. They'll say it's what I would have wanted, what's proper, what respects Margaret's memory. But you're outside all of that. You're the only one who knows the full truth. You're the only one I can trust to do what I'm actually asking, not what everyone thinks I should want. I picked up the check and held it up to the light, as if that would somehow reveal whether taking it made me complicit in something unforgivable. If I do this, people will hate me. Your family will think I manipulated you, that I took advantage of a dying man. Let them think what they want, Richard said. I'll make sure the will is ironclad. I'll leave video testimony explaining my decision. I'll provide documentation that proves this was entirely my choice. You'll be protected legally. Socially, well, that's the price of truth, isn't it? Someone always has to pay for it. I looked at Margaret's journal still sitting on the desk, then at the photographs of Claire scattered across the mahogany surface. 2 women, one who loved too much, one who loved too little, and a man asking me to make his final act of selfishness permanent. I need time to think about this, I said. Richard nodded slowly. I don't have much time left. The doctors gave me 3 months, maybe 4. But take the week. Come back with your answer. Just know that if you say no, I'll find someone else. This is happening whether you help me or not. The only question is whether you're willing to secure your family's future by helping a guilty man lie down beside his sin. I went back to Richard's mansion a week later and told him I'd do it. Not because I agreed with his choice, but because he was right about one thing. It was going to happen with or without me. At least this way, I could make sure Margaret wasn't forgotten in the process. He died 6 weeks after our final conversation, quietly in his sleep with no one beside him. The cancer had spread faster than the doctors predicted, as if his body was finally giving him the ending he'd been racing toward all along. The funeral was exactly as he'd predicted. His family arrived in black designer clothes and fake tears, already counting their inheritance before the service even started. His brother gave a eulogy about Richard's business acumen and charitable contributions, painting him as a devoted husband who never recovered from losing his beloved Margaret. The lies stacked up so high I thought they'd collapse under their own weight. Then came the will reading. I sat in the back of the lawyer's office while Richard's relatives filled the front rows, whispering about vacation homes and investment portfolios. The lawyer opened the envelope and read the terms in a steady professional voice that didn't waver, even as the room erupted. Everything, the mansion, the stocks, the offshore accounts, the art collection, went to me, the grave digger who'd spent maybe 10 hours total in Richard's presence. His brother lunged from his chair, demanding to contest the will. His cousin called me a con artist. Margaret's sister stood up and said I should be ashamed of myself for taking advantage of a dying man's confusion. But then the lawyer played the video Richard had recorded, and the room went silent. Richard appeared on the screen, sitting in his study with that same hollow look in his eyes. He explained everything: Claire, the double life, the money, Margaret's silent suffering. He showed Margaret's journal to the camera, reading passages that made his relatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. Then he looked directly into the lens and said, "I'm leaving everything to the gravedigger, because he's the only person who agreed to give me what I actually deserve. Not honor, not a place beside the wife I betrayed, but the truth, permanent and unchangeable, carved into the earth where everyone can see it." 3 days later, I stood at Claire's grave with a small crowd of angry relatives watching from a distance. Richard's casket sat on the lowering device, ready to descend into the plot he'd purchased beside his ex-lover. The priest had refused to perform the service, calling it a mockery of sacred vows. So I said a few words myself, not about Richard's accomplishments or his character, but simply about a man who chose honesty in death, even though he'd lived in deception. As I worked the controls and lowered his casket into the ground, I could hear his brother cursing under his breath. Margaret's sister was crying, not for Richard, but for the insult his final resting place represented. They stayed until the casket settled, then left in a convoy of expensive cars, already discussing legal options they'd never pursue because Richard's lawyers had made the will bulletproof. When they were gone, I picked up my shovel and began filling the grave. The work was methodical, familiar. Dirt hitting wood, then dirt hitting dirt. The sound that marks the end of every story. I patched the earth smooth and placed a temporary marker with his name and dates. Beside it, Claire's headstone stood polished and elegant, funded by the same money that should have made Margaret's final years comfortable instead of lonely. But I wasn't finished. I walked across the cemetery to the family section where Margaret lay beneath that old oak tree. Her headstone was simple, understated, exactly like the woman Richard had described. I knelt down and cleared away the fallen leaves that had gathered around the base. Then I pulled a white rose from my jacket and placed it gently on her grave. "He paid me to put him there," I said quietly, knowing no one could hear me but needing to say it anyway. "But you deserved better. You deserved everything he gave away. You deserved to be chosen." I stood there for a long moment looking at her name carved in stone. Margaret Ashford, beloved wife. The headstone didn't mention that her husband was buried on the other side of the cemetery, lying beside another woman. Maybe that was better. Let Margaret rest without the weight of his choices pressing down on her for eternity. I walked back to my truck with dirt under my nails and Richard's fortune waiting in my bank account. The money would change my life, give my children opportunities I never had. But every time I passed those graves, Margaret alone under her oak tree, Richard beside the woman he chose over her, I'm reminded that some prices are too high, even when someone else is paying them. If this story moved you, if it made you think about love, loyalty, and the choices that define us, subscribe to this channel. There are more stories like this waiting to be told. Stories about real human struggles, about guilt and redemption, about the complicated truth of what we owe each other. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because next week, I'll be back with another story that will stay with you long after it ends.